I'm here with Miss Cristina Michelini, who is the COO for Livin Farms in Hong Kong. She grew up in Italy and went to the University of Turin, where she graduated with a bachelor's degree in economics and tourism management. Cristina then gained a PhD in tourism and travel service management from the Hong Kong Polytechnic University. Although she has a background in tourism, Cristina has had a love for education as well as a passion for sustainability and the environment. That eventually led her to where she is now, educating and motivating others to be more sustainable. Welcome, Cristina.
Thank you, Holly. Thanks for having me. All right, well, I'm really excited to be here and to be part of World Creativity and Innovation Week. And I'm really excited to be presenting this specific topic, insects, edible insects. As you have guessed from my background, I'm not an entomologist, I'm not a scientist. I also don't have a background in sustainability, actually. But what is amazing about insects and what I want to show today is that they're really accessible. And even someone like me that never thought could be interested in something like that grew to really love them. So I hope you can see my screen correctly. I'm just going to share some visuals because I think they're going to be very useful to basically get an idea of what we do at Livin Farms and what are our efforts to elevate insects to the role that they deserve. So before we start, just a little bit of background on Livin Farms. Livin Farms is a startup that was founded in 2015 by an Austrian entrepreneur. Her name is Katharina Unger, and some of you may have heard her earlier yesterday night talking to Bridget about what we do. Livin Farms has two streams. We work on sustainability education on one side, and on the other side being Austria, we work on industrial solutions for food waste processing. And how insects fit into all this will become clear as we move on with the presentation. So I started with these three images because they're pretty powerful when it comes to talking about rebranding insects and reimagining the experience of insects. There are three things here: a bunch of food waste and food leftovers, some darkling beetles, which are basically bugs, insects, and what you see here is insect poop, right? I'm pretty sure that all of you would agree, not great things to start with, not very appetizing, not stuff that you would want to touch and play with, right? So it is not the greatest ingredient for a conversation with customers usually to have this combination. But the thing is, all these three things have some amazing superpowers, and when they're put together and combined, they really teach us how nature takes care of itself and takes care of its own waste and its own problems. So first, superpower of insects. And in this picture, you're seeing larvae of the darkling beetle, the insect that was in the first slide, that are eating an apple. That's the first superpower. There's lots of insects in the world, around 840,000 different species, and it is estimated that there's around 200 million insects for each human on the planet, right? So they're definitely a huge army. What we also know is that we have a huge problem with food waste. We waste around a third of the food that we produce, and we end up not consuming or losing in the process. When this food waste goes to landfill, it becomes a major greenhouse gas emitter. So insects, many of them are scavengers. They eat decaying organic matter, and they literally upgrade it, upcycle it into new nutrients. And so here you can see mealworms literally at work, eating out of the core of an apple that would have been thrown away. The second big role of insects is that they are food. Think of birds, think of fish, lizards and other type of reptiles. They eat bugs, flies, and again, here in the picture, we see mealworms. This is my dog, Cacao. Of course, I took the chance to slide in a photo of my dog. I'm one of those dog moms, but here she is literally begging to get one of these dried mealworm snacks that we bought for her, because they're healthy and because they're yummy. And again, animals, and we'll see later also humans, have this natural predisposition to eat insects. So something to pick up on. And then fertilizer. So the first slide I showed you was of food waste, insects, and insect poop. Well, that's exactly what happened. When insects eat food waste, they not only themselves turn into food for other animals somewhere in the food chain, but also their own waste, their poop, is a very good and very powerful fertilizer, especially good for houseplants. And so I'm giving you only 3 examples of the superpowers of mealworms and the problems that they can solve. They can help us solve the problem with food waste. They can help us solve the problem with animal proteins and become alternative sources of proteins, alternative sources of food. And they can also help us avoid the use of chemical fertilizer, which can also be very polluting. And so for us, the question really was, how can we bring all these 3 beneficial effects to the environment together? A cleaner environment, more sources of proteins, and clean fertilizers. When you have to, bring into people's homes something like this, mealworms, again, something that is not exactly appetizing, and not everyone wants to get this close and have this kind of living beings in their home. So we started designing. Our idea is we want to bring insects closer to people so that they can observe these processes, they can learn from these processes, they can be inspired to upcycle their food waste and potentially also to consume insects for their own food. We started designing different models of so-called insect growing technologies. These are actually relatively small, but as you can see, still pretty bulky. And remember, we are a company that has been funded in Hong Kong, where space at home is very, very limited. You can definitely not afford to buy such a bulky device, right, for an apartment like ours. And so design efforts have been evolving to try different options in terms of growing insects at home for home composting and for home consumption. And our first basically big scale commercialized product was the Hive Home, which is this tower you see on the right hand side. And this was a great product. It was enough to produce alternative proteins for a household, and enough to also compost and get rid of a significant amount of food waste, but it had a pretty high price point. So we needed to come up with something more compact, something that would fit in everybody's home, that would look nice too, that had a design that people would want, to have laying around on their tables or on their shelves, and also that brought together all those elements that are amazing about having insects at home and growing insects at home, which is 1, getting rid of food waste, 2, growing alternative proteins, 3, fertilizing your plants. And so this is how the Hive Explorer, which is the device that you see here in this image, has been designed and developed and commercialized. And the amazing thing here is that we do nothing but use design and technology to elevate insects so that there's visibility on what they can do. And even individuals at home, families, and schools can benefit from using such a device, such a small mealworm home, such a small mealworm farm, to learn and stay engaged and be inspired, basically. So, of course, as I said, the important element, the design and the compactness. This is a Hong Kong kitchen. So you probably know, as I said, Hong Kong, some of the smallest apartments in the world. So it fits pretty nicely there next to a kitchen cooker, shelves like also shelves. So as you can see, it's a very compact device, and that was an important aspect to make the experience more affordable, first of all, but also bearable in the home environment. The other aspects that we needed to consider was that people don't necessarily want to come close to insects immediately. And they worry about aspects such as, oh, I might have these, bugs crawling around the house or making smells or even flying, etc. Well, the mealworm and the darkling beetle do not fly. They're also terrible climbers, so they won't go far. And we designed the device in such a way that it's pretty much sealed closed, has filters for clean air, but it also is easy to maintain and self-sustaining. So it has a sensor for humidity and temperature and a fan and a heat plate that activates automatically to maintain an ideal environment to really farm and harvest your mealworms. And the educational side and the engagement side of it is also very important. Instead of just giving out, a box where to put some insects to farm at home and learn from, we built experience around it. So the device also comes with a science kit that allows you to pick up the insects and put them in some Petri dishes and then use a magnifier to observe them closer. And most importantly, there's a magazine that comes with it that is full of fun facts and activities that families in particular and kids in particular can enjoy and learn from, and really understand that insects are not just about being bugs, but they are about much more. They are about food systems and sustainability at large. And so with this kind of device, we really think that we can push learning and have people learn first and foremost about alternative proteins and the harmful effects on the environment of intensive beef and other types of animal meat farming, whereas insects require only a fraction of the resources. And on top of that, have also a very, very powerful nutritional profile. And so our job is to bring insect closer to people, have people understand how the loop closes from food waste to fertilizer to plants and to alternative proteins that can be consumed at home, but also to make them understand that this is not that new. This is not that exceptional. So one of the misconceptions around insects is that, well, they're an exceptional kind of food. While we know from the FAO that there are around 2 billion people on the planet that currently eat insects, have insects as part of their diet. What we may not know is that actually we do already daily eat insects in our own food. So there are, and there will always be inevitably particles of insects in any type of food, that especially those that are highly processed, like chocolate, for example, or orange juice in a carton. So you're probably already eating insects. I guess that's the point that I'm making. So it's not that much of a jump. And I know Holly mentioned this before in one of our chats. There are other foods that we used to consider absolutely, non-desirable. For example, potatoes were considered food for pigs. They were considered unappealing and ugly and dirty because they were like always covered in soil, to the point that they were even banned in France for a certain amount of time in the 1700s, I believe. So interesting facts about foods that are completely normal for us now. Take sushi, for example. That's another type of food that for us Westerners especially, for a long period of time was considered, raw fish was considered something that is not ideal to eat, it's not hygienic, has to be avoided. And the lobster is a great example, because the lobster is basically just a big bug of the sea. And it's considered a delicacy now, and it was not the case in the past. So a lot of what we do to bring people closer to insects is change that perception, change those assumptions, and do that by bringing insects closer, so proximity and education. And I think this is a very good representation. It was shared by one of our webinar speakers a while ago. Her name is Nicole Sartirani. She is the founder of Microcosmos, and I recommend that you check her out because she's an amazing insect chef. But I think it's a very, very interesting presentation because it shows exactly the type of progression that goes on in our mind when we start understanding a food as palatable and edible. So the transition from a shrimp to a cricket or a locust is not that far. It's not that difficult. It's just a matter of really understanding how insects work. And part of understanding them is to understand the environmental benefits, which we talked about, right? A fraction of the resources, and they help us get rid of food waste. But the nutritional benefits are also quite unparalleled. They are very, very packed in protein. So per weight, the amount of protein that is contained is pretty high. Some insects go up to 75% content of proteins. And they do not present the same problem that meat presents, which is lack of other nutrients, such as a certain type of vitamins or fiber, right? Insects have fiber and good amount of fiber, which makes them much easier to digest. And then, of course, vitamin B12, which is usually a concern for people that do not want to consume meat. Insects have that, and other vitamins, and importantly also omega-3 and omega-6. So we think that after learning all this is just a small step, is just a small effort to get a little bit closer to trying insects. And again, this is another photo shared by our friend Nicole Sartirani, the chef from Microcosmos in Berlin. She said something very, very smart and very powerful when she finished her webinar last week, which is just try one bite, right? And I kind of, connect with her on this because I think all of you as well, but Italian moms, we are Italian moms really have this thing that they need to feed you. And I can't tell how many times throughout my life I heard from my moms and other moms, just try one bite. Even if you're not hungry, just try one bite, right? So why not? If we can introduce insects in small portions, and rather than making them the main part of the meal, we can slowly start using them as a decoration, as an added crunch, as an added flavor to your cocktail even, as an added nutrient in the form of powder. If you really feel non-confident about the shape and about the resemblance of your food, know that insects can be presented in many forms. But I think this is the best way to get started. And this is what we also advocate when it comes to getting closer to insects. Do it one little bite at a time, one little step at a time. Why? Because insects, like sustainability and climate change and environmental issues, which ultimately is what we want to make people aware of, these are daunting and huge topics, right? And so they have to be savored and started with in very small steps. So I thought these images are pretty powerful in saying how one should get started on this journey to the future of food, little by little. And again, presentation and design is everything, right? So we started with an image of food waste, an image of bugs crawling around, and an image of poop. And I guess you can't really tell, right, from this packaging that this is insect poop. This is fertilizer, which we called warm gold. So a lot of what we do and a lot of what we buy and consume has to do with packaging, and packaging is part of our buyer consumer experience. And so our effort also goes into that, into designing devices, packaging, experiences, even materials that are appealing and that people will want to pick up at the supermarket, right? And I'm gonna leave you with a suggestion for a book. As I said, I started without having a background in insects. I'm not a scientist, and I'm also not an expert quite yet, but I'm learning, and I'm learning from insects a lot about sustainability and about food systems in particular. And when I started with Livin Farms, I started with this book, which is called Extraordinary Insects, and it's from this Norwegian researcher, and is witty, is really playful, and is so interesting, so packed with fun facts, but it's also so surprising because I don't think any of us really realize how deep into our lives insects already are. From the color of your lipstick, to the material with which your shellac nail polish is done, to, of course, more common and better known phenomena such as pollinations and the like. But this book, what is nice about this book is that, again, is literally bite-sized. So you won't be overwhelmed. You can read chapters and sections at 3-4 pages at a time during your commute. And trust me, there's not a single chapter in which you won't smile or laugh, because it's really, really witty. And so I recommend it to all of you, because I think this is a great taste of what the experience of insects should be, and ultimately what the experience of sustainability and the sustainability related issues should be. It should be fun, entertaining, and taken step by step and one bite at a time. Thank you so much. I'm gonna finish here, and let's see if Holly can join me. There you go. And yeah, I'm happy to answer questions if there's any. Yeah.
We do have a few questions. We do.
Awesome.
Yeah. So the first question is, when somebody buys worm gold, what are they buying that for? What are they using that for?
Yeah. So worm gold is literally insect poop. Basically, is insect fertilizer that is collected in our processes where we farm insects at scale. And it's a fertilizer that gets mixed with water and can be used for plants in the house. The same way you would buy, those like small bottles of chemical fertilizer. We have one here in the office called Plant Mate. But it's a much more natural and balanced as well form of fertilizer that basically reintroduces in the soil nutrients that were already in our food waste. So there's no need for us to, go and actually create new fertilizers and create new chemicals, because nature already provides for itself. Think of composting, right? When we compost, and then we can use the compost to remix it with the soil. The advantage here is that the mealworm fertilizer is a dry powder, so it's also much easier to store and much easier to use. It also doesn't smell as strongly as compost would do, so it's perfect for even apartments, right? And so we have in mind as well, and this is a point that I kind of avoided during the presentation, but we always have in mind the urbanites and people from the city. At the end of the day, by 2050, 2/3 of us will be in cities. So we need to think of solutions that are applicable in cities. And if we can scale insect farming this way, we can definitely apply that to city homes and city apartments.
Great. I think that kind of brings me to the next question here, and that is, if somebody is in a city and they're using this as a major part of their daily diet, how long does it take for the harvesting time, and how often can they do that? I guess, is that possible with this size of a unit?
Yeah, this size of a unit, because the scope is mostly educational, it probably won't be enough for, you know, like a whole family, for example. It will be enough just for a beginner that wants to decorate its say granola bowl in the morning, or like the pasta, etc. The cycle depends quite a lot from the living environment, and that's pretty interesting because mealworms can stay in the larval stage as long as 9 months, right? So a lot of it depends from the climate, etc. But in my experience, you can probably conclude the cycle in probably a couple of months and harvest mealworms. The other thing is that it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen like mealworms are all of a sudden all together become adult beetles, right? And then all together become die, etc. So there's never going to be an empty hive. There's never going to be an empty farm. It's very gradual, the cycle. So technically, you could continue to harvest all the time. Yeah.
Right. So realistically, then, as a food source, it'll probably be created in factories and more like large insect farms, kind of like what we have for cattle. So the home unit would be sort of supplementary, and then if we move more into this as a protein source for our population, then it would be produced outside. Is that kind of correct?
Ideally, yes. And I think, so here's a nice thing. You could do both, right? Because again, the insect itself is really packed with protein. So if you see it as a source of protein, say a supplement to your nutrition, the same way we see meat, right? Which we should eat 1-2 times a week, right? Then you can definitely farm it at home. You don't need as much. So one solution is to have probably not the Hive Explorer, but the Hive Home, which was the tower model that I showed earlier in a home environment. And that's something that we also consider whether, you know, it's the right time, whether the audience is ready for that type of device quite yet. But we found that the Hive Explorer was a good way to introduce our audience and our community to insects before we tell them, okay, so now here's the kit, you know, to grow your food. First, we needed to get the community to have that understanding. So that's one solution. And I think that would work amazingly in city for people that want to do home growing. I guess an analog in the plant world would be your home garden, right? Your apartment garden. It's almost never going to be enough for your whole dietary requirement. You could have your lettuce, your tomato plant, etc. But if you don't have a physical garden outside the house, if you live in the city and you have an apartment, it's usually an addition in the form of, for example, microgreens, etc. Again, very nutrient packed, fresh and close to the table, literally farm to table ingredients. But what we do in Austria is exactly what you were mentioning. It's a more scalable project, and it starts a little bit ahead of thinking about feeding the community. It actually starts with the food waste problem. So the main objective there was actually to find a solution for food waste management that was scalable and that was energy efficient, right? And we still have to find something that is as energy efficient as insects, because they literally upcycle and their digestive cycle doesn't have outputs that cannot be used, right? So for that, we work with, for example, retailers and food processing companies. So think of a bakery, for example, right? That would have large amounts of food waste on a daily basis, or food leftovers, because they're unsold or because they're part of the process. For example, like breadcrumbs for a bakery. And, you know, getting rid of that food waste, it's a cost. As in, even if you manage to sell it for, say, animal feed for farms like porks or cows, it's still a low margin, and you still spend, you know, time and efforts in placing it on the market at the end of the day, right? And it's also not great from a nutritional value standpoint for the animal itself. So by adding the insect in the process, we're just bringing everything up an extra level. At the end of the day, the farmer will have an input that is higher quality, right? we will have insects that are better fed and that we can sell. And the original retailer has not spent or lost money on managing food waste. On top of that, there's like, of course, the societal benefits that we haven't put food waste out there in landfill.
That's terrific.
So I think, yeah, sorry, I just wanted to say, I think both solutions coexist the same way home growing and farms coexist right now, right? You need both the solutions.
That makes a lot of sense. So what I'm kind of imagining then in Austria, what you're doing is it composting. So you have the green and you have kind of the waste, and then you're bringing in brown as well. I have a compost in my backyard, so I'm pretty familiar with that. So is that kind of the idea, is that it's a composting type of system? Okay.
So it's not exactly composting, because composting is more of like aerobic process, right? Like you leave food to decompose naturally. Here we take food as soon as it is getting wasted, right? To use it as feed for insects. So it works like this: you collect food waste from retailers or from businesses, and then that food waste goes into our facilities where we are harvesting, where we are breeding insects, and they need food, so they eat that food. Eventually the outcome is going to be big quantities of fertilizers and big quantities of proteins that can be resold. And interestingly, now in Europe, mealworms, the larvae that I was showing you in the presentation, have been declared safe for human consumption as well. So it's just a matter of months, I think, until we will see these kind of products on the shelves in supermarkets. We have other type of insects on the market already. I think crickets for sure. And I think I told you, Holly, crickets are very interesting because they're considered a gateway insect. So if you really want to start and try one for the sake of trying, then you should probably go for crickets, because they're easily available right now, and it's a taste that most of us would at least be okay with, because they're crunchy and they're not so overpowering, etc. So yeah, there, as you can imagine, like the implications can be very, very big when also the human market opens for this kind of insects.
That's terrific. So where will people reach out to you if they want to find out? Where should they go? I did drop in your website, the Hive Explorer, in the chat. Yeah. Is that where you would recommend people go first?
Yeah, so you can definitely check out our website. There is a contact form, and please do drop us an email. We check them daily. We also are pretty active on social media, especially Instagram and Facebook, and we post quite a lot of educational content there, posts about insects and food waste and food systems and the like. So do follow us there if you're interested. But yeah, I'd say the website, the best way to get in touch with us.
Terrific. Well, thank you so much. I'm really happy that you're joining us from across the world. And I'm Holly Haggerty with Haggerty & Haggerty Digital Services, and we're one of the sponsors of this event, along with My Favorite Art Place. And we'd like to thank you very much for all this wonderful information.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me, and enjoy the rest of the World Creativity and Innovation Week.